The instant George Whittaker seized Eleanor Parker's shirt and ripped it down the back before 32 spectators, she didn't cry. She didn't yell. She stood motionless, gripping the torn fabric against her chest, and murmured 5 soft words that would alter everything. You've just made a grave error. No one anticipated the 67-year-old substitute teacher would resist. Why would they? For nearly 6 weeks, she had been their prime target. She was the woman who apologized when others did to her, who offered a shaky smile when they dubbed her Miss Meek Parker, who acted oblivious to their mockery of her second-hand clothing. But in that classroom at Westfield's Senior Learning Center, with October sunlight streaming through windows worth more than her annual pension, something long suppressed stirred within Eleanor Parker, something her late Marine father had ingrained in her core, something she had buried for 5 long years. If you've ever felt that familiar surge, wondering what's next, you know precisely what Eleanor stood on the brink of. This wasn't merely a torn shirt or an entitled man flaunting his power before his peers. This was about what happens when decent people stay quiet too long, when systems protect the wrong individuals, when a place meant for education becomes a predator's playground and teachers become the hunted. Eleanor had taken the 4-month substitute role out of necessity. At 67, surviving on Social Security and a part-time pension, she was still grappling with nearly $40,000 in debt from loans she'd co-signed years ago for her granddaughter. The full-time history teacher, Mrs. Collins, was on medical leave, and Westfield needed an immediate replacement. The interview was a brief 15 minutes. Principal Morrison barely glanced up from his phone, asked 3 curt questions about classroom management, and hired her. Instantly. Just keep things orderly and follow the curriculum, he'd said flatly. These are fine kids from fine families. You'll have no issues. The first falsehood. Westfield stood like a gleaming gem in suburban Denver, modern steel, glass, and grand promises. The parking lot brimmed with more Mercedes and Cadillacs than the nearby dealership. The Whittaker Wing, named for George's affluent family, shone with smartboards and leather chairs that made community colleges seem drab by comparison. Parents here donated millions. Their children strode like young monarchs beneath walls adorned with banners boasting acceptance letters to Yale, Harvard, and Stanford. This wasn't just a school, it was a springboard for those already soaring. On her first day, Eleanor parked her worn 15-year-old Ford sedan between a Tesla and a Lexus, smoothed the creases from her discount rack blazer, and stepped into a world that reeked of privilege and gourmet lunches. She'd grown up differently, on rugged military bases where everyone's father wore the same uniform, and respect stemmed from rank, not wealth. This was another realm entirely, where your surname was your sword and your parents' donations your shield. The students sized her up in moments, 67 years old, a petite 5 feet 3 inches, a substitute teacher, the lowest rung on the educational ladder. She wrote her name on the board with a trembling hand, Miss Parker. From the back, someone whispered, she looks scared. Another voice chuckled, easy prey. But it was George Whittaker who marked her as his personal target. Tall, muscular, he carried himself with the swagger of a former athlete, still sporting the polished good looks. She muttered. George's smile was slow, cruel, the grin of someone who'd found his amusement for the season. What followed was 6 weeks of torment masked as jests and pranks. It started small. George would accidentally knock her papers off her desk as he passed. His friends would mutter, "Timid Parker," during her lessons. Her computer password inexplicably reset itself repeatedly. Coffee spilled suspiciously often across her belongings. Each time, she brushed it off. Each time, the silence of her peers drowned out their laughter, until the day George tore her shirt, and Eleanor Parker whispered, "You've just made a grave error." Because she was no longer just a nervous substitute. She was her father's daughter. She was a woman who'd been silent too long. And in that gleaming Westfield classroom, the tide began to shift for the first time.